So welcome to AI Ready IoT. Today we are going to be diving into some of the more popular AI-enabled developer tools that are out there. We're going to be focusing on the use of these things called MCP servers or Model Context Protocol servers. And frankly, I am here, and TJ and I are both here to learn just as much as you, I think, as I still personally feel a bit overwhelmed when it comes to AI and developer tools and the rate of change from almost one day to the next. But thankfully, Alex is here to walk us through his AI toolchain from the beginning. Now, as I do have some typical kind of webinar logistics to cover first quickly. Of course, as you have questions during the presentation today, like what even is an MCP server or what is an LLM, we're certainly going to answer some of those, but as those and other questions come up, please ask those in the Q&A panel provided in your Zoom UI. Should be down at the bottom there in the middle. Again, TJ and I are going to be here to answer as many questions as we can, and we're also going to be here to kind of pester Alex as he is presenting with relevant questions. But the question we always get is this being recorded? And I'll head you off by saying, yes, it's being recorded, and it's going to be available on the Blues YouTube channel at this URL here. While you're there, of course, I recommend subscribing. Then you'll get the notification when the recording is updated or uploaded. Now, a quick intro before we get kind of kick things off. My name is Rob Lauer. You don't need to care about me today because I'm just doing this intro, but I'm Senior Director of Developer Relations at Blues. More importantly, with me today is Alex Bucknall, who is a staff DevX engineer at Blues. Alex puts in a lot of time on our tooling and our SDKs. So if you've used our Note Arduino or Note Python libraries, you have Alex to thank. And I'm going to give Alex the GitHub Copilot helmet for the day. All right. So again, if you're anything like me, you can maybe get a bit overwhelmed at the verbiage and the acronyms surrounding AI. And we're all guilty of this, but we may sometimes throw around terms like LLMs and MCPs without fully defining them. And today is really your chance to stop us, ask any questions that you have. Honestly, there are no stupid questions today or ever, but especially today. But again, TJ and I are here to keep Alex honest, right? We're going to be interrupting him early and often to make sure everything is well explained. But let's kind of set the stage here a bit. And if I were going to oversimplify what AI needs to operate, it's data, right? And what is arguably the largest untapped source of data today? Well, I would maybe posit that it exists in the IoT, right? Like every connected device is collecting, delivering data like sensor readings, states of whatever it's monitoring or measuring. But what about all the metadata that we don't think as much about? Things like voltage, location, signal strengths, Wi-Fi access point visibilities, maybe device orientation, timestamps, like the radios that you're using. When you start combining all of this data, AI can start generating insights that you would not normally consider, and that makes it incredibly powerful. So the IoT context in which Alex is presenting today is based around data acquired by the Blues Notecard. And I do want to spend just 2 or 3 minutes here on the Notecard and our cloud service Notehub, because I know for a fact that many of you are new to Blues offers. And frankly, I need this all to make sense to everyone. So to start, Notecard enables wireless connectivity for your product, but it is not just a modem. It contains a radio, components, circuitry, all to make it function as a standalone wireless connectivity module. And what does it do? Well, I like to really simplify it and think of it as occupying this really boring space in the middle here, right? This part of cloud enablement that you do not want to deal with, right? You're the expert at building your product. You're probably the expert at building your cloud application. We provide that seamless bidirectional data flow between the two. Now, what gets people most excited about Notecard? Well, I always like to say, first, our cellular Notecard provides global reach, 140 plus countries, ships prepaid with 500 megs of data, 10 years of service. There are no monthly SIM fees when you deal with the Notecard. You can also literally connect your product to your cloud with 2 lines of code. And it's also built to be low power, consuming 8 to 18 microamps when idle, depending on the Notecard type you are using. And what are those types? Well, there are plenty of Notecard options depending on the radio that you want to leverage. Cool thing is they're all swappable in terms of the physical connector, that M.2 connector at the bottom. And more importantly, the fact that you can use one API the same way to program all Notecards, allowing for truly mixed radios with one set of firmware running your entire fleet. However, Notecard is really only half the story at Blues. The other half is our cloud service that we call Notehub, and out of the box, Notecard knows exactly how to securely connect with Notehub with no configuration required. And again, regardless of the radio in use. So it's going to sync its data with Notehub, and then you're going to configure Notehub to sync or route that data to your cloud application, whichever cloud app it may be. So it really provides this easy to use bi-directional data syncing data transfers. And if you haven't gone there yet, check out our developer guides and documentation at dev.blues.com to get a better picture of everything I just kind of threw at you there. But back to our story today. We've got all this data sitting in Notehub or sitting in our cloud application. What can we do with it? Or maybe we haven't even gotten to this step and we want to explore the capabilities of the Notecard with AI to develop and improve our product. Well, now is probably the time for me to hand the controls over to the star of our show today, that being Alex. So let me stop sharing, and Alex, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks, Rob. So let me share my screen. Let's do that. Get my slides up. Okay, so as Rob mentioned, there's a whole world of AI out there. We have LLMs, we have MCPs, we have Gen AI, we have all sorts of things that you can throw at a model and generate some sort of output. What I'm going to be talking to you today about is the model context protocol. And what this does, this acts as a layer to connect your virtualized LLMs, your large language models, to real things. This is things that are locally connected to your machine. These can be things that are server endpoints that don't directly interface with your LLM. There's a whole world of MCP servers out there now. In the last couple of months, there's been a big explosion, and tons of businesses and companies and vendors and software providers have been building MCPs to connect their products to large language models. Anthropic, I believe, was the original founder of this, I guess, API or interface for LLMs. They came up with the model context protocol, and it's now been adopted by OpenAI with ChatGPT, and other platforms like VS Code and Cursor now support MCP as well. So MCP, or the model context protocol, is an open protocol that standardizes how applications interact with LLMs. One of the nice things I've seen is how Anthropic describes it, which is like the USB-C port for AI applications. The idea is that it provides a standardized interface such that an LLM that knows how to talk to an MCP can query different resources, tools, prompts that are exposed by that MCP to get data from real world sources. And we'll look at some examples today as to what they can be. The MCPs that I've been working on and focusing on predominantly focus on building Blues products. So how can they help accelerate your journey as a developer, provide you with insight and context that perhaps some of the Blues team has intuitively, but maybe you don't as someone picking up the product for the first time. So they're designed to help teach and educate, as well as provide insight into data and expand on all of the resources in the Blues stack. So looking at the architecture in a bit more detail, you have two main elements. You have your MCP clients and you have your MCP servers. MCP servers are the things that I've built that I'll be demonstrated today. Your MCP clients are things that you've likely interacted with. If you're an engineer and you write code, you've probably used VS Code. That is an MCP client. One tool that we'll be showing today will be Claude Desktop. It's a really nice interface and interaction point to talk to Claude's selection of LLMs. This is a standalone desktop application for, I believe, Mac and Windows. I don't think it has Linux support just yet, but we'll do some demonstrations with that to show you how easy it is to interact with MCPs through it. And this diagram is sort of showing a selection of different types of MCP servers with local data sources. In our case, this will specifically be like a note card. So if you've got a note card attached to your laptop or your computer, that's what we'll consider here as a local data source. It's something we can interact with locally. And then there's an alternative, which is these web APIs. So your MCP server might extend an API for some sort of web service that you want to interact with. This could be, a weather API. It could be Notehub, where your data is stored. You can think of MCPs like wrappers for these APIs. But the thing that's powerful about MCP, and one of the things I think people often miss about why they exist is that they provide both context and documentation baked into them. And this is really important because having an API for any product is fantastic, but it has to be well documented and the context to using it has to be presented well. A big part of presenting useful and usable APIs is also to have the complementary documentation that goes with it. An MCP interacting with an API without any context of how to use it is largely useless. It doesn't know how to interact with it. It doesn't know what to do with it. So what's really important about building MCPs is to actually bake that in. And when the LLMs query MCPs, they'll often do things like look at the descriptions, look at the metadata associated with any of the tools that are attached to that MCP, and ask it like, how do I use that thing? What should I do with it? Like, what's the next step? Should I chain these things together? How do I use this command, this tool, and then how do I take that and interface it with another tool? That's been a really important learning lesson for me as I've been building these things, and it's actually a really important thing to feed back into our own developer documentation because, in some ways, teaching an LLM how to use an MCP is a lot like teaching a user how to use our tools. So for the Blues team, it's been a learning experience about how to bring all this stuff back from working with AI to also help our users learn in the same way. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's two main types of MCP transports, and this is how you talk to an MCP server. Today, we'll be focusing predominantly on the STDIO. So this is a local link between something connected directly to your machine and the LLM that's talking to it. In this case, it's a standard input-output interface. So if you're interacting with a shell or terminal and you get a command and response back, that'll be over standard input-output. If you get an error back from it, that'll also be over the same interface. The alternative is server-sent events. So this is similar to like an HTTP server. We won't be looking at anything based around that today. We may be experimenting with this for Notehub in the future, but all of our tools so far have been built on standard input-output. So when it comes to building an MCP, there are three main components. I'm going to look at them in order that we've been prioritizing them in terms of how we build our tools. So the first tool that is probably the most popular for MCPs is their selection of their own tools. What's powerful about tools is that an LLM can query any of their tools available to it in an MCP on its own and of its own accord. So if you ask it something, it'll take the context from which has been given and then go through and query all of the tools available to it in any of the MCP servers that have been granted access to it. What it will then go and do is it will look at any of the descriptions, the metadata associated with it, and decide if it wants to use those tools. This is why it becomes increasingly important that you do a really good job of documenting and describing how those tools perform and behave, because often the LLM will go and interact with these without explicit permission as long as they've been turned on. So if I was to say something like, hey, I want to send a note file from my note card up to note cloud, can you write me a test note so I can see if it works? What my LLM might do at that point then is go and see if I have an MCP server and does it have a tool that exposes a point where I can make a note file request. That'll all happen without me explicitly saying use the MCP tool that sends note files. This is where it's different from an API. Like you're not specifically requesting an exact resource or exact tool. Often the LLMs will make the decision for you, so you have to document how to use them. And this plays into resources. So resources are a bit different to tools. Tools are effectively functions and actions that an MCP can use. Resources are more like physical embodiment of data. So that could be a data set, that could be a text document, it could be a markdown document that describes some sort of behavior. You can even have binary files, images. These are interacted with by the LLM in different kinds of manners. Some MCP clients require you to explicitly declare these resources, like Claude Desktop, you have to declare which resources are available to you. In the context of our MCPs, we've been using resources to present the Notecard APIs. So what our MCP does, as you'll see when we get into it, is at boot, the first thing it does is goes and scrapes our documentation and provides a local resource bank of all of the current API endpoints for the Notecard. And so what the LLMs that can do that interact with this directly, like Cursor and VS Code, these pop up in the background and become a resource that the LLM can interact with as you're doing development. This is super useful to have the API docs like directly in your workspace. It means that if the LLM is going to use tools to make Notecard requests, it already knows exactly which APIs it can use and what they are supposed to do. As well as this, you can have things in your resources like best practices. We use them for best practices for writing code, Note Arduino, Note Zephyr, some of our SDKs that we use for development. They have nuances around them about how to use them in particular ways. We've been integrating best practices and creating these documents that describe like how to use Note Arduino to get the most power efficient firmware out of a Note Arduino application. Things like what are the best practices for writing bandwidth efficient Note files? So like using templates. All of this stuff we've managed to squeeze into resources that effectively we call best practice documents. And the final most common interaction point for an MCP are what are called prompts. We don't actually use any prompts. And this is actually a question I'll pose to the audience to say, has anyone done anything with prompts that they find useful? Because from how I've gathered it, it seems to be more of like a pre-interface point of interaction with the MCP, where you say, I want you to behave in a certain way before you actually start interacting with it. And from our perspective, it's not been super useful to have that. It requires the user to drive that interaction, which is why they don't really add value when you're having a tool try to educate the user for how to do something. It seems like the user has to request something before they start interacting with it. But I'd be interested to see if anyone has actually used prompts in their MCPs. So from our perspective, we have three MCPs. The first one that I'll be demonstrating today is the Notecard MCP. This runs locally on my machine. It's a MCP that abstracts away the Notecard CLI. So we have a CLI tool that is designed to abstract some of the complexities with interacting with a Notecard. As you may know, if you've used a Notecard before, you can talk directly to it over serial and send requests backwards and forwards over a serial USB connection. Notecard CLI abstracts that to a command line interface tool, and then the MCP further abstracts that to provide context and awareness to an LLM to directly use that CLI. The next MCP we have is an MCP that abstracts away Notehub. So this is probably our closest MCP to what would look like a wrapper for our Notehub API. But again, like the difference between an API and the MCP is that it provides context and awareness about how to use things on Notehub. So rather than just giving you direct access to Notehub endpoints through the API, the MCP tells the LLM how to use these endpoints in particular ways. So if you want to query, for example, a project to find all of the devices in a certain location, the MCP explains to the LLM how to do that rather than just giving it an endpoint and says, give me all of the locations you want to search for, and then returning them back to you. It explains to you like the different ways of filtering for device types based on location, based on location type. So if it's a best estimate location or if it's a GPS or cell tower location, it can handle all of that awareness, and it provides to the MCP an understanding of what all those different nuances mean and do. And the third tool we'll look at is the developer MCP. So this is one I've been working on more recently. This has been really interesting because I think this is the biggest piece of feedback we've had for our own user documentation. This has been a MCP that takes in all of the best practices that you may not know until you start getting your hands dirty with a Blues within the Blues ecosystem. There's a lots of things that happen and that occur that we have documented in perhaps hard to reach places, and you'll only stumble upon them maybe if you're trying to use a certain feature in a certain way. So what this tool aims to do is to provide awareness to an MCP, sorry, through the MCP to your LLM, all of these nuances around building with Notecard directly to the LLM so that you don't get stumped by them when you run across them. The LLM can implicitly understand all of these strange behavioral patterns or unique features that we have with the Notecard and be able to incorporate them and help you build them into your firmware, into your products, whatever you're doing with a Notecard, help you expose those behaviors and get the most out of your product. So power efficiency, bandwidth efficiency. This is just scraping the edge of what we're actually being able to expose with this. And so hopefully today I can show you some of the power of what this lets us do. And what I'll also add to that is that part of the driving reason of designing the developer MCP was to try to reduce some of the hallucinations that we were seeing. LLMs are fantastic, but the drawback with today's models is they do hallucinate. There's a ton of data that's been scraped when these models were trained, and they aren't perfect. They often make mistakes, and they're often very confident at making mistakes. They'll tell you something's true, and it's not necessarily true. So what some of these MCP tools try to help you do is, as you're developing, put guardrails in place that stop the tools from extrapolating and making things up and providing you with perhaps the wrong route to your destination and whatever it is you're trying to build. They try to keep you on track and to build things within the bounds of our documentation and within the bounds of what's actually supposed to be the way to design a product.
For
Alex,
the for
oh,
the
cool.
developer one, I'm curious, what is the input to that? Because presumably you're not just telling it just scrape the entire docs and use that whole thing as input. Is it more just like calculated in that? Or there certain things? Are you specifically putting in questions like answers to really common questions or scenarios? How did you attack that?
So this is still very much in development. A lot of this is like very experimental. What we've been doing so far with the developer MCP is we've been just basically hard coding in what we would call application notes. So anything that is interesting to do with behavioral design. So as we spoke about templating, for example, the best practice with writing note card firmware is that you should template your notes to get the best bandwidth or the best compression for the size of those note files. So at the moment, what happens when you ask an LLM to help generate some code that uses a note card, it will discover a tool on the developer MCP that's basically the table of contents for the rest of the documentation in that MCP. And in that table of contents, describe the overall best practices that should be performed. And these link out to individual documents that we've handcrafted at this point in time. There's a conversation that the three of us need to have at some point is, can we actually post these on the docs, or can we make the docs more consumable directly for the MCP? We've spoken about this previously. I don't want to get into what we're going to architect our docs to look like here, but that's something we've been thinking about just to give our audience context of what we've been planning and doing.
Cool. Yep.
I just had a quick question about you mentioning hallucinations with LLMs, and I'm wondering if that's an opportunity for the MCP prompt is to kind of rein the LLM in at that point and have it be more focused, if you will.
Perhaps from what I've gathered, it seems to be a way to like seed the conversation with something that the MCP designer thinks is important for the user to express before they start interacting with it. So, I mean, if I were to give an example of what it could be useful for in our developer MCP, maybe it would be to give context to the tools about their experience level. So you might say, I am a confident software engineer working with like low level hardware abstractions. I don't want to use abstraction frameworks like Arduino. I want to write bare metal code, and I want it to be as efficient and as lean as possible. That might be something you would give as a prompt before you start interacting with the LLM uh, through the MCP. But I'm not sure why you wouldn't just tell the LLM that to begin with, but perhaps
Right.
it's something that the MCP would then use to configure its tool set.
Okay.
Cool. So with that, I'll quickly do a demo. So as we're going along, you can see how to set this up for yourself. I like using Claude Desktop just because it's a really simple interface to look at. It's really easy to see what I'm doing, and when I'm explaining stuff, there's none of the wizardry that's going on with cursor or VS Code when you're trying to just demo something. So if you want to follow along, um, what I'll do is I'll go through the setup process now. You may need to spend some time downloading Git repos and installing the tools, but in post you can find this video, go back through the tutorial, and then have a go at setting this up for yourself. So let me stop sharing this presentation, and I will jump into Claude. So let's make that full screen. Okay, so to set up your MCP servers, the first thing you need to do, actually, let's get a full screen. It's easier in this perspective, this view. Nope. Okay, so the first thing you need to do from Claude is to go to all over the place. Go to settings. So on Mac, it's up here in the top corner. Go to settings, brings up this window. You guys can see this. That's right. I'm not just blindly doing this.
You can, yeah, we can see it. Is there any chance the
Great.
font size can go up on this? It's readable, but
perhaps not. I'm not sure I can zoom in on that.
that's fine. As long as you explain what you're seeing, we should be good.
No, I can only zoom in on an actual Claude. It's going to be really weird. Okay. So in settings, head down to developer, and you'll see it's already pre-populated here with my tools. But the way that Claude Desktop and quite a few of the other MCP clients store their MCP interactions or interfaces is through a JSON file. So if we then go to edit config, you can see there's this file that's given me here, which is Claude_desktop_config.json. If we double click to open that, it'll open it up in my text editor. Just ignore this for now. And you can see that here there are 3 MCP servers. So we have Notecard, Notehub, and Dev. So what I will suggest is that if you've worked with MCPs before, it's quite common for these to be built in Python or Node.js. We actually elected here to use Golang. Most of our stack and most of our tools are built in Golang. You can build standalone executables. We just prefer the tooling. It's very easy to use. If you head over to the link at the end of this presentation, you'll find out where to download these from, but it will be basically github/blue/note-mcp. But what you do is you basically point at where that executable is. So in this case, the command argument describes where to find the MCP, and then we pass in some arguments. In this case, the only argument we have at the moment is your Notehub credentials. These live as environment variables. So when the MCP starts, it pulls in a .n file, which describes your username and your password for Notehub. That's the only thing it uses it for at the moment. These other MCPs don't currently use, Notecard and the dev environment don't actually use anything at the moment. Just have them described there in case there's some use case in the future. So that's the quick setup process for Claude Desktop. We can probably jump into trying it out now. So my next slide goes into the demo for Notecard, and what we'll look at here is specifically the Notecard MCP. And what's a bit difficult here is that there's a lot of overlap with the tools. So often I'll be doing something in the Notecard MCP or showing you the Notecard MCP, and it may start to interact with the Notehub MCP. So one of those interactions you might see is when I ask it to send a test note file up to Notehub, it will likely call the MCP server for Notehub and query that as well. So you'll start seeing the tools leak into each other because of the way that we've designed them. They all interact with each other intentionally. Right. Okay, so to get started, I have here, I've got a Notecard and a Note Carrier F. There's currently no and there's no host in there. There's no microcontroller. We haven't got a Feather on board at the moment. We will later. But this is a WBEXW, so a wideband European wireless note card. We'll connect this over USB to my laptop, and then we'll jump into talking to it through the MCP server. So first thing to do is if you click on tools here, you can check to see that the MCPs are actually live. You can see there's some other tools available there as well. But the 3 we're interested in are Dev, Notecard, and Notehub. So let's start talking to the MCP and find out what this note card is that we have connected. So I can say, tell me about my note card. So what the MCP will what the LLM will now do is see if there's an MCP available, and we'll get prompted to ask to use the integration. So we'll allow this to run. And what's happening now is it's basically using Notecard CLI in the background to find and query the note card we have attached. So here you go. It's gone ahead and found our note card. So as I described, it's a WBEXW. It's told me the device ID, the firmware build on it, board version, and its capabilities. So Wi-Fi, cellular, and it has a GPS. Great. So let's go into a little bit further. Let's find out. Can you tell me if my note card is running the latest firmware? So this is one of the tools that I built when I was getting frustrated about constantly having to update all my note cards. I said, there's got to be an easier way of doing this. Why can't an LLM do it for me? Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe it's just that it's a bit of an awkward process to go through to do all your updates. I have a lot of note cards. So here it is in the background. It's done two things here. So the first thing it's done is it's gone and requested available firmware versions for the note card. It's assumed that I want the LTS version. And it's actually checked to see if it wants the DevRel version as well. So let's see what it says here. So it says there is a newer version of LTS than my current one. There's also a newer DevRel version, and his recommendation is I should do an update. Okay, so let's update to the latest LTS. And through the power of Node CLI running in the background, which you can use to do firmware updates, it will now go ahead, grab that new firmware version from the LTS branch and update my note card. So this takes a little while, but you can see that the note card is being queried by the LED flashing. That means that it's being talked to by note card CLI. And what it's likely doing here is it's actually probably uploading the firmware to it as we speak.
What is prompting? So it asks permissions there a few times. Is it just anytime it wants to use the tool, or are there certain actions that have that extra security prompt? What determines that?
So I think you can explicitly tell it to grant access to all tools. By default, it always asks you every time you have a new chat which tools you want to grant permission to. One thing I will preface with this is that you have to trust the tools that you're running locally on your machine. They are an executable. They could be doing anything. Our tools, the source will be provided if you want to compile them yourself because you don't trust that we upload something that's legitimate. You're welcome to do it. If using other people's MCPs, exercise caution. They are executables. The LLM will do its best job to try to protect you and ask you, do you want to use this thing before I arbitrarily use it? You have to grant permission to do it. So that's what you're seeing there. You're seeing it ask me permission to use these MCP tools.
And then somebody asked in chat, did that use the Notehub tool or the Notehub MCP server at all to find like what firmware versions are available? Or
so that's actually working without the Notehub MCP. That's actually scraping the firmware repository to grab the firmware versions. So that's not using the Notehub MCP. You'll see it pop up if we actually query the Notehub MCP. It'll say Notehub rather than Notecard with the tool that's being used. Okay, so that looks like it's been complete. It's told me it's finished. I did see it flashing while we were talking, so we can double check that. Say, okay, can you query the note card and confirm?
Alex, if I've got like 20 MCP servers configured, is there any like sense of profiling so I can tell Claude in which context I'm developing, or is it we just kind of trust it to use the right MCP server for the right context?
So if you have lots of MCP servers, it can get confusing. Something has happened here. It seems like it's lost permission to talk to my tools. As I preface this with, there's a lot of nuance with some of this stuff. I may have to restart the session to get it to talk to this tool. Back to your question, Rob. It can get confusing if you have lots of tools available. What I'll say is that if you're doing things that have lots of similarly described tools, the MCPs look very similar to the LLM. So unless they are very well described, if you're using not very well documented or poorly described MCPs, it's likely that it will make mistakes and use things incorrectly.
Okay.
I have seen it, but when I've been developing these things, that it sometimes uses the wrong tools because I've described them incorrectly in the tooling descriptions as I've been building them. It can happen. Okay, I think I might have just crashed that somehow. So let me restart that session. I'll try that again. Tell me what firmware version. Of course, it's the demigods. When I try and show it off, it decides to crash.
We've had a couple questions come in about whether the way to try this, is it all local, or is there any way to try it on like Notehub and our dev docs? And just to kind of head off those questions, like we're looking into that sort of thing. This is like a maybe might come to that point, but at the moment, these are open source GitHub repos, and using the steps that Alex is showing is the only way of testing them out today.
Yeah, this is definitely a discussion we've been having. I'll add to what TJ was saying is we already have tools that make it easier for you to use or to learn about the note card without actually having to have them locally. So you can head over to the dev website and interface with our web terminal. One of the things we've discussed, and again, I'm not going to just allude to stuff that we're yet to do, but is like, could we do stuff with MCP that's baked into that? So can you get access to this stuff as you're looking through our docs and wanting to learn about how to use our tools? You can already interface with a soft note card through the web terminal. Maybe we could expose these tools through that and make that easier for people to learn and use that way. But this is again part of doing the webinar for me, is that I'd like to hear from people and learn. Is that something you're interested in? Yeah, let us know. Okay, so here you go. So we've queried it again, and it has found that our firmware version has been updated. So it was 8.1.3 before. We're now on 8.1.5. Must have just crashed the tool somehow. This is literally the first time I've done that, clearly because I'm demoing it. That's obviously why. Okay, let's go on to something else we can try. So I have a Wi-Fi network over at the moment. Let's tell the MCP, please connect my note card to my Wi-Fi. My SSID is Blues and my password is notecard1234. Obviously not my normal credentials. Okay, so it's asking me here to make a note card request. So I'll allow that. And you can see the request is being made here actually. So it's a card.wifi request with the parameters SSID and password. And it looks like that response was successful. So it's told me that everything looks good. This is also some of the things that TJ and Rob will probably pick up on. Running car.status after applying car.wifi doesn't tell you anything useful. Sometimes the LLM will try to think ahead and do things that it doesn't necessarily need to do to add more context. This is something that we're working on with the MCPs. Do we need them to be that verbose? I've experimented with telling them to, like, don't do things that you don't need to do. Sometimes the tools go over the top and try and give you more than you necessarily need. So card.status here doesn't actually tell us anything useful about the Wi-Fi status of the note card. But it does look like that has been applied. So let's try and now connect the note card to a Notehub application. So I have a Note card application, a Notehub application I created earlier called MCP-demo. So I can tell Claude, let's connect the note card to a Notehub project called MCP demo. So now the tool is being queried against the Notehub MCP. You can see here it's specifically wanting to use tools on the Notehub MCP. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check, see if that exists. Doesn't believe me, which is fair enough. Might as well check for itself. What it does there, it goes and it grabs the project UID, so it can directly point to that exact product. And then it's going to perform a note card provision. So these are all requests against the tools that the MCP exposes. And it's doing some other things in the background. So this MCP provision is actually like a best practices tool that I added that gives context. So rather than it doing something, it feeds back to say, hey, if you're doing a thing with this data you've given me, here's what you should do in order to be able to provision a note card. Then it's going to run a whole bunch of different note card requests in the background. And then finally, it's run a hub status to check that it's connected. So yeah, clearly our card Wi-Fi worked because it connected to Notehub. And then it says it ran a query against Notehub to check against product events. And it seems like I found it, which is great. So it looks like the device did appear in that fleet, and it has done a sync with Notehub. So the tools went ahead and did all that for us just by asking us to connect it to the project. I've realized we're going to start running out of time on this one, so I'm going to start picking up speed and maybe move on to the next demo. But what we'll see through this is, sending note files and seeing them on Notehub and how these things all interact with each other.
Yeah, I'll just say that that's really slick that it can pull those two together. That was really cool.
Yeah, and what my hope with this is that we can abstract away some of the getting started complexities, but also at the same time, hopefully try and teach people as we do this stuff. So what I don't want to do is I don't want this stuff to happen in the background and not provide any context about what's going on. The idea is that it gives you a very explicit instruction about what it has done. So when it comes to developers and engineers building with Notecard products, you know what's going on. You've had tools help you. Imagine having myself, Rob, TJ in the room with you to assist with your projects. This is what we want the MCP to be able to do. Okay, so let's now jump into the next demo, which is visualizing a Notehub project with Claude Desktop. So here we're going to use a pre-existing demo. I need to stop sharing for a second and grab the actual UID for this, which is somewhere off screen. Bear with me a second. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the project UID for our AirNote project. So AirNote, if you're not aware, is a fleet of devices we have all around the world collecting air quality data. This is one of our test fleets we like to use for doing demonstrations and highlighting project features because it's an existing fleet that is spread across the world. Okay, so let's create a new session. And what I'll say to Claude is, let's take a look at a Notehub project. Give it the UID. Tell me about it. So again, it will query the Notehub MCP. It's going to find out something about this project I've given it, and it's going to tell me a little bit about what is in this project. So you can see it's using these tools here. These are the tool interactions. There's the project fleet and device lists being used. It may use more, depending on how verbose it feels like it's going to be today. What I will say about these is that the tools often feel non-deterministic, and it does make it quite difficult to develop things for them. My philosophy with developing MCPs and sort of how we've been trying to build these tools is to provide guardrails. So less about trying to force behavioral routes, but more to stop them from going beyond and hallucinating more than anything else. Okay, so here we go. So it's told us it's found it. The project is called AirNote. It looks like Ray is the administrative contact. So if you've got any problems with it, send them directly to Ray or don't. You can see there's a couple of different products inside this project. We have a AirNote with a Geiger tube, AirNote prototypes, AirNote with unspecified sensors, and AirNotes with particle counters. And you can see there's also a whole bunch of different fleets that are inside of the project as well. This is a huge fleet. I think there's hundreds of devices in it, so we will be capping our queries. Otherwise, we'll be here waiting forever for the tools to bring everything in when we start talking to it. But you can see it's gone ahead and found loads of information for us. This MCP is designed as like a think of it as a natural language interaction tool for someone who's maybe not a developer or an engineer who wants to get data from their fleet. Maybe this is a business manager or someone who is in charge of logistics and operations and wants to understand what's happening with devices that are deployed. Rather than having to try and go through Notehub and learn how Notehub works, you can talk to an LLM, which will then talk through the MCP and get the information you want back. Right, so let's try something else now. Let's say, can you create a table of the location and last transmission time of the first 20 devices you find? So one of the nice things about Claude Desktop is that it can build you artifacts. So what it's doing here is it's creating me a table, as you can see, all the devices that it's found from my query. So I've asked for the first 20 devices in a table with location and last transmission date. And you can imagine this would be somebody who's managing a fleet, wants to see which devices are inactive, where are they based, when was the last time they transmitted from. And now I have this really nice table that I can share with colleagues, or I can give to a customer, or present in any other way. And you can do all sorts of things with this. You can build graphics. You can get Claude to generate tables and charts and diagrams and all sorts of stuff. The world is sort of endless in terms of what it can generate. It's really good at using things like mermaid diagrams. It's really good at creating SVG infographics. I've had it produce some really nice like pie charts to display data. There's loads of different examples you can do with the data once you get it back from the MCP. Cool. So it's told us it's reported back on its findings, and it's told us some useful information about some of the data it's found. I didn't ask for any of this, but it may be useful. The LLM here is being particularly verbose today. Let's go a bit further. Let's try and see if we can create a bar chart of the distribution by location of the first 50 devices based on country. What I'll also say about this is that you may have noticed I started a new session with Claude after I finished doing the Notecard demo. The reason I did this is that there's something called a context window that LLMs have to juggle. And basically, this is all of the tokens that you sent to it for it to consume. When you interact with some of these tools, the LLM ends up being presented with a lot of data. This is the job for the MCP developer to provide it to you in a token efficient way. So this is something we yet to optimize, but you get a lot of data back from the MCPs, and a lot of unoptimized MCPs will give you a lot of data back. So you often need to start new sessions so that the tool can keep up with how much context has been given. The more context you saturate an LLM session with, often it increases the likelihood of hallucinations, and it forgets things and starts to lose awareness of what it's been doing. So if you're starting a new query or a new line of questioning, it's really good to start a new session. Okay, so what it's decided to do here is create me a really nice infographic showing us distributions of devices based on country, which is fantastic. I mean, if you were somebody who really wanted to quickly show to a customer where your products were based, if they had note cards in them, this is a really nice way of doing it. And I can click up here in the publish button up here, and it will provide me with a public URL that I can share with you. It's a really nice way to show customers and any invested or interested parties data about your fleets.
It's depressing how nice it looks as well, like without having to tap into a designer for anything.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
I'm assuming too, in terms of accuracy, like this is probably like you wouldn't trust this necessarily if this is mission critical, but you have reason to be more confident in it because the MCP is providing guardrails for it to fetching it. That's more or less right?
Yeah. Again, there's no way of knowing 100% for certain it's not had a hallucination at some point in the journey without looking directly at the data that makes up this table, this chart.
Yeah.
But I have found that whenever I've asked it off the bat for infographics like this, it has been accurate. It's not possible to say for 100% certainty that a hallucination has never happened with tools today. So what I'd always say is if it's mission critical, double check your data because I can't say for certain that it's 100% correct.
Makes sense.
One other thing I wanted to point out, like this kind of butts up against what I was referring to at the beginning, where you can start asking Claude at this point, like identify anomalous behaviors from certain devices based on their voltage levels. There's anything, I mean, like anything that you can dream up. Those are questions you can start asking.
Yeah. Again, I'm having to breeze through some of these. I have some more interesting talking points on Notehub, but I think it's best we jump into probably the next tool. But as Rob was saying, you can query events that are being driven through Notehub as well, and say if I wanted to find out which of these AirNote devices have been observing like poor air quality, I could ask that, and it'll be able to go through the list of events generated from the Notehub API and tell me which of those devices have reported poor air quality. Okay, so let's go and look at the.
Mention one other thing quickly. This AirNote data is public as well, so if anybody wants to try what Alex is doing, you can do that.
Okay, so we'll start one more window, and I will touch on my final demo, which is going to be developing Note Arduino firmware with VS Code. So I know there's a lot of opinions, a lot of strong opinions on preferred AI editors. I'm normally a cursor guy. It's my tool of preference, but I know people like to use VS Code. I think a lot of our team use VS Code, so I'm going to do it in VS Code to show you probably one of the most commonly used tools. So as I mentioned earlier, the developer tool, the developer MCP server rather, is designed to help guide you as a engineer or developer building firmware for your microcontrollers, not just microcontrollers, for any of your embedded development that needs to talk to a note card. Let me fire up VS Code and we can get into it. So the idea of this tool is to provide best practices, to provide guidance to the LLM, so that when you're asking it to generate code for you, it can go ahead and create to its best ability with the guardrails we provided to it, good and best practice incorporated firmware. So let's go and say, build me a Note Arduino. We're going to use Note Arduino here because this is the first SDK we've been targeting. Note Arduino project for the Swan MCU that uses a temperature sensor to log temperature, humidity, and pressure. Can you guys see this, or is the text too small?
Yep, looks good.
Can see it. If
Okay.
you want to command plus up like a notch or two, I think it would
get a little
help.
more.
Yeah,
A little bit
that's good.
to Notehub, and then I'll say every 30 mins. One thing I've been tacking on to the end of this, just so that we can actually see the data coming through, is use serial logging, so we can see what's happening. Okay, so you can see we've got a blank environment here. There's no files created. There's absolutely nothing in this this project. You can probably see from the name of this workspace what we're trying to get towards here. But this is now the tools taking everything that they know. And what I'd say is that LLMs are fantastic at this point in time. Even like today with the hallucinations are generating very, very good code. You have to sanitize it. You have to go through and check for mistakes. But for simple things like asking for Arduino projects, it's pretty reliable. So we'll give this a go. Okay, so Copilot is going to start looking at what we've given it, and it's going to ask us to see if there's anything in the workspace. Now it's running the MCP server. This is this dev MCP. So back to TJ's point earlier, I granted permission for all these tools to run without permission, explicit permission earlier. So this is why they're running in the background with these check marks. So you can see what it's done here is queried the best practices, which, as I described, is like a table of contents for all of the best practices we want to instill on any LLM trying to build no Arduino projects. It's gone and then found this Arduino sensors project and also the templates project. And now it's going ahead and creating an Arduino project using a temperature sensor, the BME280, and it'll start building stuff in the background. It'll probably take a little while it does this, so it might be a good time to tackle some Q&A while it's building things.
Yeah, and I know when you install this, so the cool thing about MCP servers is that you can use them across tools. And I actually find the one problem I have with Claude Desktop is that it relies on that like JSON file to install like a local path. It just feels like we're really doing this in 2025. But I find some of these other tools are better at finding these servers, and I'm hoping that they evolve so that there's just like a simple marketplace, so you can just go out and say, well, I want the Blues one, and I click it, and then it's all set up. But I feel like we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think that because the tools are evolving so quickly, I think even consuming them, it seems like the general consensus is to move away now from STDI style tools. So we'll see what this looks like. But I would also love to have a marketplace for it. That'd be fantastic. So you can see stuff's happening in the chat window here. One of the things that I've put in the tool today is to create a flow diagram of the code flow. I think this is a really nice way for users to visualize like what's happened here. So as it generates firmware for you, as you've described it, what it'll also do is create a mermaid diagram, which will instill basically a code flow so you can see exactly what's happening without having to dive into the code and read everything. While it's still doing stuff, do we want to take some Q&A? I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah, somebody had asked about using Claude Code as well versus Claude Desktop, and yeah, we use it. We actually use Claude Code quite a bit internally, and are definitely big fans. So it's another option out there if you're looking for more of a agentic workflow, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. All of these work great across anything with MCP support. The nice thing about MCP is a standard interface for the tools to be used. So if it can consume an MCP, generally the experience should be pretty good across whatever's consuming it.
Also some questions around like managing token usage. I imagine that's quite the challenge because presumably you'd get the best possible results if you like read every event ever in the history of the AirNote project, but presumably there's some limits enforced at some point. Like you can't just give the LLM everything.
Yeah. So the tools have at this point in time, they'll just give you whatever you ask back for them. This is something that we'll add to them is to say, like, be wary about providing huge chunks of data back to the LLM because that will saturate it. So what you don't want to do is have this like 5,000 event log that is this big JSON object that the LLM has to then parse and consume because that will then consume all of its token availability. It's about this is more on our behalf of building smart MCPs. But as we're coming at this from the perspective of like also building MCPs, try your best to just give what is needed to get the job done rather than everything. The whole kitchen sink doesn't solve the problem. It's just the specific things that you need to add value.
Makes sense.
So the tool is still working away in the background. Are we hard stopping Rob at the time, or what's the plan with this?
We can let this finish up for sure. I think it's definitely worth seeing. And if anybody needs to drop, of course, feel free to, but and you can catch up on the recording.
Yeah, I mean, I'll quickly talk through it while it's doing stuff. You can see, and I'll explain some of the things that we've instilled to the best practices. So I think I touched on this earlier, but one of the important things to do with the note card when you are actually looking at deploying something that's beyond a prototype is to use templates. So you can see one of the things that we told the LLM to do here is to use templates, and that was through the best practices tool. So you can see here it's gone ahead and created a template, note template for the pressure, temperature, humidity data. It's also added some other things that it thought was useful, like count and time. LMs are often verbose, so you may get some extra stuff that you didn't think you necessarily needed. You can always fine tune that later by talking to it, saying, I don't want this stuff. So it's gone ahead and created templates. That's the default behavior. Use templates. If I have to say it every time, use templates. And you can follow through this code as well with the mermaid diagram. So what I like to do is preview the diagram, and we can have a better look at this now and see what's going on. Just picked a very terrible font to use. Thank you.
Now, to be clear, I wasn't lying when I said it took 2 lines of code to connect to your note card, but when you start getting all the best practices and everything and a real project, obviously that scales up just a little bit.
Yeah, and it's building a lot here. Like it's building you stuff that you probably don't need. I mean, I haven't asked for build scripts. You can see this it's created this build script here. The tools generally try to be super helpful. I don't know if I consider that helpful. I think it's kind of annoying, but this is stuff we're learning about as we develop them is to like, try to provide a good experience as opposed to like throw everything at you. There's files here as well describing all the libraries that it's used, which may or may not be useful to you. There's a README that tells you exactly what it's doing and how to wire things together. That's kind of useful. I appreciate that. Let's see what's asking for me here. It wants to use my build script. Okay, fine. You can have an executable as long as it's not going to do something terrible in the background. I might just disappear if it's decided to remove my my entire directory. All right. Okay. Let's let it finish. Got too much stuff going on here.
Yeah, someone just noted in chat that Claude 3.7 and 4 tend to go the extra mile. And I've seen that as well, too, in my own development. Like when I'm doing like front end work, sometimes it'll just create unit tests without me asking it to do it. I'm like, I mean, that's nice of you, but like let's get there. First, let's just get the stupid thing working.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see like I don't think I needed a project summary as well as a README. I mean, I appreciate it, but it's a bit too much. Okay, so let's accept these files, just blanket, take them for their word. They work well. What we can do then is say, can you compile this project? So one of the things that I baked into this that is a may or may not stay is it has the Arduino CLI in the background. So what it will now do is it'll try and check if it's compilable. So it's going to first check if it actually has the Arduino CLI. and then it will find the MCP server to talk to it. I like this because it means that there's a closed feedback loop for the MCP server to help provide guidance about if it's making mistakes. If it can't compile the code, then that's obviously a non-starter. I don't know why it wants to do all this stuff with the CLI before it lets me call the MCP. There is an MCP endpoint. Please use it. Okay, hang on. I'm going to cancel this. Try again. Compile the code. Okay, it's trying to use the build tool for some reason. I don't know why it decided to want to do this. It should use the MCP endpoint, which basically will take whatever it gives it to and use the Arduino CLI with our specific tooling wrappers around it, so that it compiles the program. But maybe if I tell it, use the MCP to compile the code. Thank you. Okay, finally, we have it. Work. Okay, so you can see here now it's trying to build this for a swan. In the background, it's generated a output directory and it's trying to build the code. So it may fail. When there's big context windows, sometimes it fails. So here you go. So it's failed. Missing binary operator. Great. It's a compilation issue. It'll now go ahead and fix that. This is part of this like feedback loop, is that we can create a better experience such that the LLM will just fix itself as it stumbles upon its own mistakes. But your mileage will vary with this stuff. Like, they feel sometimes non-deterministic. What we're trying to do with the MCP tools is provide at least the best practices and some boundaries on your experience. So we'll compile this again, see if it's fixed that mistake.
I do find too that when I've been toying with this, that Claude tends to make more intelligent decisions about how it uses the MCP servers than VS Code does, because that gets into the non-deterministic nature of this. Is it's not just the servers at play here, because it's different LLMs that can use the MCP servers, which just adds another whole realm of potential differences in behaviors and how these things actually work too.
Yeah, and I definitely echo that experience. It's why maybe it's just an experience thing, but I like using cursor. I find my experience is better with cursor when I use MCPs. But your mileage varies depending on what you're used to and how you would expect the tools to perform.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's gone ahead here and compiled it. So let's actually try and upload it now. So I'll grab off my desk a SD link. So we'll attach a swan to an SD link, and we will plug that into the Note Carrier F that I showed you earlier, and we'll upload some firmware to it, and then we'll see that the code actually runs. I think we're going to run out of time to do the whole feedback loop, but take my word for it that it has spoken to it has communicated with Notehub. We saw the note card talk to Notehub earlier. Now it's just using the Swan to drive it as well. Let's upload. Okay, so there's another MCP. There's another MCP tool to actually do the upload as well. This is more validation for us as the MCP builder to know that it has worked. In this case, it has not worked because the debug probe is not plugged in. Try that again. Okay. There you go. So that looks like it's been successful now. It has shown me that there's been a successful flashing. Great. Okay. Now let's have a quick look and see if we can see that. Is that big enough for you guys? Can you see my terminal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any VS Code extensions required to install here? Somebody just asked that question.
to
I think for MCP, and I think they're built into VS Code at this point.
Yeah.
yeah, for VS Code, MCP is, I think, well, it's part of the Copilot tooling. So let me explain out what's going on here quickly while I catch the logging. So at the moment, the note card isn't being communicated to by the Swan because it's currently attached to my machine through the Notecard CLI. But the important part here is that the firmware compiled and we are seeing actually logging temperature data. What I'll do now is I'll actually unplug the USB that we use to power the Swan and plug it into the note carrier. And then the note card should hopefully start getting communicated to. And you can see it's flashing away there that it's actually being driven now by the Swan rather than me directly. So what we will note though is that we didn't actually ever set a product UID. I don't know if it actually warned us about that in the compilation at some point. It's supposed to. So it looks like I got too caught up with its compilation error. Anyway, as you can see, there is firmware now running on this one that was entirely generated by my initial prompt, which was, please write me some code to talk to a BME 280. Well, not even a BME 280, a temperature sensor. And now that should be talking to Notehub, assuming that we set the product UID correctly. And I don't want to keep everyone here for too long. We are now running over our time. But as you can see, these tools provide guardrails and barriers to steer your development in the ways that we think are most valuable to you. And if you're looking to have some in-the-room advice, say you imagine myself being there next to you, helping you with your project, the MCP is a really good alternative to that. You have to be careful at this point in time of hallucinations, mistakes being made. We're learning as we build them. They're not perfect. I'd still very much put a experimental pre-release flag on these things, but we're hoping that they will become staple tools that your development will utilize as you're building things and learning about the note card.
I just posted a link in chat. If you start using these and have any feedback, please use our forum too at discuss.blues.com.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate the comments about it's really hard to do a demo for a non-deterministic system. Yes, I have a whole script here that I'm like trying to follow to keep it on track, and it's completely ignored all of it. So I tried my best.
One more question that just came in, actually specific to the note cards. What's the benefit of going with a EMEA or North American note card versus a straight global? It's just cost. Our global note cards are more expensive than the region specific ones. All right. Yeah, so thanks everyone for attending. I thought this was just fantastic content, and you'll get a follow-up email in a couple days with some links and a link to the recording as well. So this is great. Thank you so much, Alex. It's fantastic content.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
next time.